What's going on, everybody? Rodrigo Fonador here with another episode of Asheville Real Estate News. Bringing you another episode today on numbers and market update, very similar to the show I did last week solo. But this time I'm joined by Zacory Ruiz and Jeff Stewart of Keller Williams. And I want to bring them on the show because they know numbers way more in depth than I could ever hope to. And so instead of just giving you my opinion, you're going to hear other people's opinions as well. Hopefully we'll give you a full perspective of what's happening. We kind of just talk about trends and things to look at and what to expect, whatever that means, or what as much as possible during this time. So hope you enjoy the show. As always, please share it with a friend, rate the show on iTunes or on Spotify. And if there's anybody or any topic that would be helpful to hear about during this time, let us know. We'll do our best to get them on the show for you. Hope you guys are staying safe, staying home, and see you all in the next one. All right, Zac, Jeff, thank you so much for being on the show and to talk real estate and numbers at this interesting time here in Asheville and in the world.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So for people maybe who haven't seen either of the two episodes we've done with you, Jeff, before, do you mind kind of just 30-second, 60-second bio? And then Zac, if you could do the same afterwards.
Absolutely. Sure. Yeah. Local real estate agent for a long time. Got 10, 12 years of experience as a real estate agent. Moved into just a leadership position. So now I'm management over Keller Williams offices here in Western North Carolina. My job is developing agents and talking business.
Cool. That's what we're here to talk about. Zac?
Yeah, very cool. So I'm a newer agent here at Keller. I work with Jeff and basically have a background in startups and data and numbers. And so I came to this world kind of looking at it slightly differently. And from that, given the new environment that we're in, Jeff tasked me out with kind of looking through the data, and we've come up with kind of a really cool report.
Yeah, no, excited to dig into it. You said something that I kind of would love for you to unpack a little bit if you can or if you feel comfortable. Is you said you look at it a little different. How has that manifested itself, or how has that played out in your opinion, or how what's that look like?
To be seen, right? But so far so cool. Just because a lot of the things. So I had when we were talking a little bit before the call, basically. Mm-hmm. So I had a little stint doing investment banking in New York, mm-hmm. and sort of the way that I was trained and had to do that job was to look at data in a very specific way, and not only on a micro level, but at a macro level, kind of holistically. Mm-hmm. So as I came here and saw some of the reports coming out, I was kind of like, hey, I think there's a great opportunity for improvement here. There's an opportunity to shed a little bit of light on the data more than how many homes closed. Well, that's great, but what does that mean in context of everything else going on? Mm-hmm. So I looked at some of the opportunities in this industry in that way. And here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. It's here we are is a good way to put it. Hey, Jeff, do you mind kind of giving your quick overview on how you feel things are before we get into the numbers and maybe your best bet at a short-term forecast?
I feel like I should save the forecast.
but maybe not like a numeric forecast, but more of like, I guess, let me rephrase the question. Do you think anything's going to substantially change the way things are done business-wise in the real estate because of this, either short-term or long-term?
Yeah, for sure. So first off, overall view, I think is uncertainty. And that's probably the mm-hmm. one word that we all can agree on. Our processes and trends and the way that we look at stuff is based off historical experiences, and what we're moving into is a space that we've never been in before. So mm-hmm. I'm hearing a lot of conversation about fear, and on the other side of fear, there's a lot of opportunity. I'm hearing also conversations about opportunity. So I think it's really important that uncertainty isn't a bad thing. I think a lot of our opportunity and amazing transitions that have happened have been on the back of uncertainty mm-hmm. or change. So as scary as this is, the biggest part is there's the compassion and the just real impact on families and what the income looks like, what your housing situation, what your all those different metrics and things that play into your life. And that's probably the hardest part. Market wise, think we're going to see improvements because of this, because it's forcing our hand into spaces we probably weren't comfortable. People don't like change. So moving into these spaces is like, it's exciting. It's scary, but it's exciting to be forced into change, because I think we'll get a lot of efficiencies out of it.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. Well, so the purpose kind of today's call is a little bit to look at the numbers, kind of looking back and just seeing if we can glean anything to tell us like concretely what's going on, because kind of as you mentioned, Jeff, and I'm sure you've seen it as well, Zach, there's a lot of like, feels like speculative conversations of just like, well, this is what I think. And like, well, why? Oh, just because. Okay. So hopefully we can dig into this a little bit more and walk away with something that's rooted in numbers, which is great about real estate. There's always good data to work with.
So I'd like to start with when we go into the conversation about what's changing, I want to talk about what was prior to this change. And I work at Keller, and it's not a Keller conversation, but we do a lot of numbers tracking. We actually keep it for 10 years, month over month, in every metric. So what my first thing I did was I leaned in and said, where are we at in January, February, March? When we compare it to the previous years, how does that compare? What's really interesting is that actually closing out March, we were exceeding in almost every metric. We were exceeding everything. Like
from last year or from the previous months of this year?
Previous months, all the way 10 years back.
Okay.
Which is really crazy. So when I look at things like closed sales volume and contracts written and those type of things, I don't know that we all felt that we were booming as much as we were. I mean, we know the market's good, but I want everybody to know that it was very, very strong going into this. So we're going to talk about some changes, but if you're at a 10 and you have a 30% change, you're still
at 7.
Exactly. So I want to put that in perspective, because we really were in a very strong place from a numbers standpoint, from a market standpoint. So I just wanted to make that point really clear.
Yeah, I think I hadn't thought about that, and kind of made me think of something. So I got into real estate in 2012, right? And so I know for me, like every year that I've been involved in real estate, it's always gone up. People are getting into the market, sales are going up, people are buying, selling. So it's been interesting it's not necessarily like, it's just, if there is going to be a dip, and there probably is going to be a dip, it's not, like you said, it's a dip from historically good to like maybe historically average, which isn't, it's good to keep that in mind. And so, thanks for mentioning that. It's a great starting point.
Yeah, it's really, we often use the analogy of tides, like all boats rise in a rising tide. And we've been in it. So just let's be honest with ourselves as we talk about the tide receding a little bit. Let's find our base and figure out where we're going to rest on that, rather than just freaking out and saying, it's falling apart, it's falling apart. I just don't know that the numbers support that yet. So, and that's where Zach's got for us.
Cool. Well, let's get into the numbers. Zach, as you're, pulling it up, do you mind kind of giving us some context as far as like how or where you're getting this information, and then maybe your thought process around how you organize it and what you look for or why things stand out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can see the screen now.
Correct. Yeah.
So this is volume 1 of what we're going to start doing for the county, other counties, as much as we can, hopefully. So basically, I pulled this report from MLS data. And so MLS data comes through with a lot of noise, right? And so a good deal of what is done is kind of cleaning the data. And first is figuring out, how to look at historical views, how to look at the present views. And then there's the other lagging metric of when the data is updated in the system. So when a realtor closes a deal or something changes in the transaction, it's on them to upload that into the system. So if you were to pull that data and then they upload afterwards, then it's not in there. But thankfully for the volume of sales, the one-offs don't terribly affect it unless that segment that you're looking at doesn't have the highest volume. But the trends are the trends. So basically, I will skip the executive summary and just kind of look at a glance of what's happening on some important metrics around volume versus last month.
Okay. So is this volume for March 2020 versus?
Yep. So So this is for March 2020 versus last month. I don't know if you can see my mouse.
Oh, there it is. Yep.
Yeah. So at the bottom, it's the amount for this month, the positive or negative change. So the color and the direction of the arrow, and then the percent of the change versus last month. So new listings were actually up 26% from last month, which is great. You know.
So some people who are going to only do audio. So when you say last month, just to that's February 2020.
Yes.
Okay.
So everything we're talking about is March 2020 versus February of 2020.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So in March of 2020, we ended the month with 475 new listings, which was an increase of 26% over last month. And that's not nothing. You know, that's pretty good. And you got to think that the stay-at-home orders and all the uncertainty around coronavirus and everything started happening at the beginning and hit in the middle and near the end of March. So, you know, you can't say what might have happened, but that number was probably tempered down. You know, it probably could have been better. There, like Jeff was saying, it was a very strong market, and it continues to be a strong market so far. The active listings at the end of March, we had at 968, which was up 2%. So it's kind of keeping steady around there. And as we'll see a little bit later, that trend has been holding since the beginning of the year, more or less. Now, where we may see something already starting to make an effect is the under contract percentage. So in March, we had 493 under contract, and that's down 22% from the end of February. Also, this is a number back to the data, and this being volume 1. This is a number that I'm in talks with MLS right now of confirming. So there's different ways that they categorize a pending deal or an under contract deal. And so depending on how you pull the data and slice and dice it, you're getting different numbers here. So this will be something that will be updated if we have this in the show notes and everything. We'll make sure to give you the most recent number. But right now, standing behind this one, if you just pull everything that's in the MLS right now, going back, you get 493 that were under contract on the last day of March. So that's down 22%. And that's not, you know, that makes sense, right? With the uncertainty going around, especially if you're an underwriter and a mortgage person, you know, jobs, people are on furloughs and everything going on right now, there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty. So, and if you were about to make an offer, then it makes sense that you might hold off. So that's certainly contributing there. But the homes sold stayed about average. I think last month in February, there were 305. This month, there are 306. And again, as we'll see later, same number. Even though volume was different last year, the homes sold was the same. So also good. Our expired listings were at 39, which is an increase of 15% since February. So if you think about it, generally listings expire at the end of the month. When you sign up with your realtor, you say, hey, you know, I'll sell the house from this day to this day. That's my shot. So if the market's changing, as it very much is right now, and there's uncertainty, then that certainly would influence someone to decide whether or not they would continue listing their home. So even though there's an increase there, we can kind of explain more than, you know, the market just changing on itself. It's the world is changing. Yeah. And again, withdrawals, we see a huge change over last month. 63 withdrawals, which is an 80% increase over last month. And again, kind of the same thinking behind there. You know, if I was uncertain about selling my house, or I wasn't fully on behind the idea or everything, I didn't like the offers coming in, you know, I would withdraw now. It would make sense.
Yeah. Jeff, is there anything that you'd want to dwell on or that jumps off the page for you there?
So this is, I think it's really important that what we've done here is we've really zoomed in. So we're on a month-to-month evaluation of what's happening in the market. That can be, without zooming out, there are some pieces of this that can be a little bit misleading. So I want to make sure that we're really clear on this. So when we're zoomed in at this level, it is typical through seasonality that we would see an increase in new listings between February and March, right? So the next report that we're going to run is we'll get into comparing this month this year from that month last year, so we can see what our change is, because seasonality will affect these for sure. So as we move into April, May, June, which we historically would see a much stronger market through the summer season, we'll be able to go month over month with this and start to say, typically I've seen this in this month, now I see this, so we're down by X percent. Right. So I just want to be clear that this is to show us that we are still seeing trending in the direction that we would hope to see it in a lot of these areas. But I do want to be clear that we also have seasonality that we'll be backing out of that, so we can get a little more clear. And we can do that the next time we come on with numbers to look at what change we're seeing year over year.
Yeah, that makes sense to account for this season. So, okay, great.
Yeah. And so next we'll have an at a glance with activity. And so this isn't as effective, but so we have our days to close, which is just calculated as the day you go under contract until the day the deal closes in the system, right? So we have that at about 47 days across all price ranges, which is an increase of about 4%. Now the average days on market reduced significantly to 66 days compared to February, and we'll get to that in a second. That's down 23%, so that's good. Now our absorption rate was about 32%, which is down 21% this month. And so for everyone at home, the absorption rate, if you're wondering, is just the homes that closed this month divided by the active listings this month. And so I'll just read from the slide here for the people at home. Basically, the absorption rate is the rate at which homes sell in a specific market over a given time, usually a month. And that's what we're using. We're using a month here. The higher the absorption rate, the faster homes are selling. An absorption rate of about 20% is generally associated with the seller's market, meaning that homes are selling fast. And an absorption rate below 15% is generally associated with the buyer's market, meaning that homes are selling relatively slowly. So if we go back up to this slide here, our absorption rate is down to 32%, but it's still very, very strongly into a seller's market. It's still a strong and fast-moving market, all things considered. So the average sale price across all sales in Buncombe for March was at $380,000, $384.41, which is an increase of 3.5%. So strong, very, very good. The average list sale held steady at around 98%. So people are getting what they're asking for. There's not a lot of negotiation room on price, and that's another sign of a very strong seller's market. And then our months of inventory, although it went up 10% to 2.97 versus last month, again, still very, very strong seller's market. So the months of inventory represents how long it would take to deplete the inventory, assuming no new inventory is purchased or put on the market. And again, it's another metric that's used to determine the health of a market. So in your months, excuse me?
I was going to say, we typically associate a 6 months of inventory as a balanced market.
Yep. And so again, we're very, very safely, for now, right, what Jeff was talking about with these buffers, we're in a very strong and safe seller's market.
So it kind of goes back to the conversation we're having at the beginning, that we went from a really, really, really strong seller's market to now a slightly strong seller's market so far. Exactly.
I guess we'll get into it at the end, but if there's a positive here, it's for those people trying to buy a house. You might get a little bit more bargaining power and be able to make more moves. So here we have a slide of all sorts of data. And if you just kind of want to look at it and call anything out if you want, this is based on price ranges. So it starts off 0 to 200, and then it goes by 50 grand therefrom until about 500. And then from 500 goes to 100,000. So 5 to 6, 6 to 7. And it's strong. You know, once you get into the 800, so back to our sellers markets, right? So starting at 800, the absorption rate is indicative of it's going towards a buyer's market, and their months of inventory is, like Jeff was saying, around 6, is still around healthy. So this is where this report is going to start getting cooler and cooler as the months go on, because we'll see those changes and those trends. We'll start knowing where we're going with a little bit more data, and it's pretty granular down to the county and to the price range exactly. Where we do have a buyer's market is in the 1 to 1.5 million, or I guess the 1 to 2 million really, and then 2 million plus. Which makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, for people who don't look at this data super quickly, Jeff or Zach, is there a column that either of you guys particularly look at first for whatever reason, and why?
So I'm often looking at the market as a whole. So I would like to know, are we in a balanced market, or are we more favored toward a seller or a buyer? Because just through supply and demand economics, it gives me an idea of the health of the market. Were you going to say something?
No, is that kind of looking then at months of inventory to give you kind of that feel of whether it's a balanced market or not then?
That's right. Yeah. So, and just to really zoom it out, I mean, if you just have a ton of houses on the market, obviously your price, for the home will start to come down. It's just supply and demand. So that as a firm owner manager, those are the things that we look at.
Mm-hmm.
What's the health of the market? The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go, the reason we have this broken down into price points is because I want to know based off so we have other data that indicates about where the average in the market is. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to move to the far left column and look at the different price ranges. And am I starting to see trends like Zac mentioned, where we're either in the buyer's market or seller's market? What's really fun about this is we've been doing this type of report for a long time, and you can literally watch the colors creep up and down. Like month over month, you'll see them push, which is really interesting. Mm-hmm. The reason that matters is because when we are consulting, and notice I didn't say sale, but when we're consulting with a potential client, we can start to say, here are the things we've been seeing from movement. And this is why this report is so important that Zac's doing. And here's what I anticipate will happen. Now, we don't typically have things like coronavirus where we're navigating this environmental variable that's throwing everything out of whack. But what this does is it gives us our best guess on prescribing a course of action or recommending something for a client.
Yeah. Awesome. And if you're looking to buy a house and your realtor hands you this, or you just find this from the podcast, right? It's also very informative. For example, so if my price range, I think I want something between $400,000 and $450,000. Well, in March, we see that the average list sale price was just over 100%. So if I think I'm going to go in and give them a 20% off offer and negotiate back, not going to happen.
Yeah.
Right. And if I think that this house, just came on the market this weekend, it's like, I should wait and look at it. I'm sure it'll be fine. Now you look at the average days on market, might not be the case. Mm-hmm. Right. So your realtor will be able to explain to you, hey, based on the strength of the market, again, going off the absorption rate in the months of inventory, you got to move. And so.
Yeah, I wanted to mention something there. So that's really interesting, and maybe you're going to touch. You can shut me up. You're going to touch on this later, Zac. But what's interesting is when we get to that $4 to $449 price point, our average that you had on that last sheet was $380. Was that right, or $380 something? Right. Yep. What's really interesting about that is I believe in May-ish we saw a tremendous drop in interest rate. So what that changes is the affordability of the consumer. So if my buying power was X, and interest rate drops by 2 points from 5 to 3, I now can afford, and I don't know the metric, but I think it's $25,000 to $50,000 more in home at the same level of income on a debt to income ratio.
Yep.
So what you'll see is as interest rates drop, our average price point was between $350 and $399, and I just find it curious that now we see
that just $4 to $450
of average. Look what popped, right?
Mm-hmm. No, yeah. You start back to what we were saying earlier and what Jeff was bringing up. You start seeing things holistically, rather. How does it all come to play instead of just zooming in? So yeah, we can go forward now.
Yeah, let's keep.
Unless you have any other questions.
No. It's always interesting to see kind of who's looking at what and why, and so that was it. So let's go on to the next slide.
Yeah, awesome. So here we have. Now we're going to get into the graphs. And the graphs is just kind of a visual representation. And so what Jeff was talking about earlier, again, volume 1, volume 2 will look different. We went from, so the furthest left side is March of last year. Mm-hmm. And then all the way to the right is obviously March of this year. So what we looked at is the trailing 12 months of activity. What's happening overall? And a lot of the great feedback we've got is that you should see, maybe the last 18 months. What happened leading in? What's that seasonality look like? So that's something we're taking into account. And so, but basically the number of active listings compared to last month increased by 2%, which we went over. And the homes under contract, the homes under contract decreased 26% last month, but the ratio of homes under contract is only 4% from last year. And so why is that important? Right? So last month, it looks like, much less happened, but still proportionally versus what was happening last month, the market is still doing what it does, just a little bit less volume. And that reduction has to at least be in part due to uncertainty surrounding the coronavirus. So, and back to that. So we'll see here. So this last point is the overall volume is down 7.5% from last month, but about 25% from this time last year, right? So what's interesting about that, so I'm going to skip ahead really quick, actually. So listings and closings, right? So if you look on the right here, March is 306 closings, and last year is 291. right? So even though, again, the volume is down, we're still selling as many. Things are still moving. So you do have to look at things all together. You can't just zoom in and say, oh, it was down from last month. What is happening here? So back to this. So listings were down 11% for this time last year, but up 26% from last month. Again, that's the volume. So March home sales were flat compared to February and slightly higher than 2019 again. So again, like Jeff was saying, one of the hopefully positive silver linings of what's going on here is we're entering the historically strong time of the year. So instead of being stellar record breaking, it might just be a little less than that, but it's still great. Still very, very good. And if you have any questions along these graphs or any comments or you want to add something, just jump in, please.
No, there's not for me. And same thing for you, Jeff. If you want to jump in, I feel like they're pretty self-explanatory and just interesting to look at them.
You know why? It's because I asked for the graphs because I can't stare at a page of numbers all the time. You make me a graph or something.
Yeah, no, it helps to have the both there. So no, thanks, Zach. Go for it.
Very cool. So home prices. Home prices, this is a graph we're looking at the average sales price versus the average list to sale, just to show that, basically what they're asking is what they're getting. And then there's a highlighted line here, which is this blue line, and that's the trend. So the overall trend from March to this year is that prices are increasing on average. They were up 3.5% from last month. So March was a great time to sell your house. And then the average home price has increased about $10,000 since March of last year. So looking forward, if you can't see the graph, the words of this is basically that April saw a slight decrease in prices without a global pandemic last year, but then it began to rebound later in the year. So what we're hoping to see is some version of that as well. And again, it talks about how Buncombe enjoys an average list to sale price of about 98%.
Yeah, actually, there was one thing clear when you said I know this is all Buncombe County. Is this Buncombe County including City of Asheville, or is it Buncombe County excluding?
It is including the city.
Includes, okay.
Which that's a great point to bring up because our cost per foot numbers can vary by $200 to $300 a foot when we move into the CBD. Mm-hmm. So that's a great point to bring up.
Yeah. No, perfect. That's Jeff, do you remember at all, does it matter? I don't know if it's just weeding into details that aren't too important, but why there would have been a drop from last year going into April where there would have been a slight decrease and then jumping back up? Is there anything about April that is normal, I guess?
No, I don't have any environmental variable that I would think of other than maybe the backed up demand to list homes may have, because a conversation we hear a lot as a realtor is we'll go into a listing appointment and they'll say, I was really thinking about April or May. Mm-hmm. Right. So I would not be surprised, and I don't know this to be true, but I would not be surprised if it's a result of that pent up demand with inventory coming on the market and probably the more expensive homes.
Yeah, cool. So here we have our days on the market. Big spike in February, something we're looking into, but this is just what the data says. So big spike in February, so it came down tremendously over from February to March. And then, so just kind of getting a little zoomed in on this because it's a very zoomed out number. We have that the homes between $200,000 and $250,000 are moving the fastest. So sellers in that market only waited an average of about 47 days before signing off on an offer to purchase. And then, as you get more expensive, it obviously takes longest, but one that's really standing out right now is the 900,000 to 1 million range is moving noticeably slower, waiting on average 379 days before a sale. Wow. And that's just from March sales numbers. Again, that's the month. That is not the best number to look at.
Right.
You want to look at that one holistically. Because that's just, so that number is calculated if it sold, right? If it didn't sell, it might have only been on the market a couple days. So that doesn't mean that homes in that market are on average there. In total, it's ones that sold in March.
So for those of you between the 900 and 1 million price range, price your home accordingly, or you'll be sitting on it.
If you don't price it well, it'll take a while.
And that's a great point. So if we come up here, right? So for those that can't see it, if you have your one, so we're looking at, what was that? Let me just see here. Sorry.
And we can see it fine, Zach. It's clear.
So 900 to 1 million, right? So so this is where the month numbers start making sense. There's about 25% of them are pending, right? You can start getting more granular. You have a 94% average list to sale, which is below the county average, below these other things. So to Jeff's point, think of pricing accordingly. That's your ticket. How do I sell faster? Right. Among other things. And then again, let's go over to the months of inventory and the absorption rate. It's looking like it's healthier, more towards the middle, eking towards buyer maybe, right? So when you use this information, you can back to the consulting that the realtor offers, you make much more informed decisions about pricing and marketing, everything on how you sell your home. And then on the other side, if you're a buyer, now you know how to use the leverage as well. So days on market, contract to close. So that increased just a tiny bit. So back to what Jeff was saying here, this is something we're speaking with our partners at Keller Mortgage about. So in August, there was a huge spike. Basically July, August, and September, there was a huge spike in the time it takes from the moment I sign this contract until the moment I sell or buy the house, right? And so back to environmental factors there, we had the rate decrease from about 5 to 3%. So like Jeff was saying, in the 5s to in the 3s, that's about anywhere from $25,000 to $50,000 more purchasing power. On top of that, so Buncombe County, when you leave the city of Asheville and the Asheville greater region, like you were saying, you start qualifying for USDA loans and income assistance loans, right? So if you couldn't qualify before in the below 200,000 and now you're in the 2,000 to 250, our fastest moving market, a lot more people were able to go in and try and buy homes. So that inundated the mortgage market, one with requests to purchase to begin with, right? 2, refinancing. Right now, it's the summer months. Everyone's on summer. It's hard to get people to come. The parents and the paperwork. It's just kind of a storm that we're seeing. May explain why there was such a spike in the summer. And back, so kind of talking about how this does price wise. If you're selling a home, there's a pretty big spread between $450,000 and about $700,000. Those are taking the longest, around 60 days. And then some homes are moving very fast. So 300 to 350, 400 to 450, and 800 to 900 are moving the fastest, just about a month. So something to think about depending on where you're at, going back to that one sheet.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, I'm very surprised that, and even looking at that first spreadsheet, that a lot of the lower priced houses were actually had, I think it was either second or the lowest price to close list ratio. Yeah, which was, you'd have thought that would have been one of the ones that'd be closer to the 100, but apparently it's not. So
right. Well, it's interesting. Just from a realtor standpoint, you'll get a lot of homes that perhaps would have been in the 1 to 150 range, where they're like, "Wow, with this big price per square foot that we're at, let's push it and get up into this price point." Mm-hmm. Which maybe so this is perceived value, or it's quantitative versus qualitative, but we'll get into a space where it's like, yeah, that's not a $300,000 house. So, I mean,
no matter what we do,
yeah, right. No matter what we do.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So the one on that is with views, I think that's always the conversation. It's like, yeah, it's really subjective.
Yes. Completely.
As far as, like, it doesn't necessarily mean your house is worth more. It just might mean it sells faster, or whatnot. Yeah,
it's so cliche, but your house is worth literally what a ready, willing, and able buyer is willing to pay.
Yeah.
Our job is to get as many people that are ready, willing, and able to the table, because and we get into supply and demand, which theoretically will push our price point as far as we can take it without breaking the elastic of the appraisal basis.
Yeah.
So that's literally the name of the game. So I love that you brought that up.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and then our final slide here, when you were saying what's the most important slide, well, depending on what side of the table you are, a lot of people are interested in the contract to cash, right? So how long will it take me from the moment I list my house until it finally closes and there's cash in my pocket, or I open the door and congrats, welcome home. So in March, sellers got paid an average of 18 days faster, which is great. According to March sales data. And so back into so what does this data mean? Well, so it's a combination of things. It's the days on the market plus the contract to close. Mm-hmm. Since we know the contract to close stayed pretty steady, then it's the days on market that went down, which is a market thing instead of an external mortgage thing, of why the contract to cash is doing well, another sign of the healthy market. And that sums it all up, right?
Cool. Awesome, man.
I did have a chance to look into what I was saying earlier. So if you look at the month of March and you are selling your home between 900,000 and 1 million, then, it's 379 days. Well, the average for the 6 months is 209 days.
Okay.
Right. So again, that's why you want to have your informed consultant realtor help inform you what's really going on.
Absolutely. That's a good plug for it. So on that note, let's go back to the three of us then on here. Jeff, when on that note, Zac said, as far as having your informed consulted realtor, what does that look like now versus what it looked at like 6 months ago or whatnot? I know Gary Keller has mentioned in some of his books of talking about like new markets, right? When things change and we're in a new market, seems like that might be the case now for sure.
Yeah. So I think that it's really important. We talked about a little bit about mindset. I want to touch on that a little bit, but in general, you want to align yourself with somebody that's paying attention to the numbers, because there's a kind of a misnomer out there where people believe that real estate is a sales business. And there's no doubt that there are sales and marketing techniques and practices that are involved in what we do. But the highest value that we can get is working from that consulting basis. And to consult, the first thing you have to do is you have to have a GPS. Where are we now? Where have we been? And where do we want to go? And that honestly is in the data. Mm-hmm. So as a consumer, because I know you have a lot of people that watch or listen that are either not necessarily working with a realtor, not realtors, or have no intention, you have to be a student of the numbers. It's the only way that we can make educated decisions moving through it, because the gut's great, and some people's guts are better than others. Yeah. But at the end of the day, the gut may leave money on the table. It also can set unrealistic emotional expectations for you. So it doesn't. I'm not saying it always has to be a realtor. Of course, that's our business, and I believe that the highest value is in that. We see that historically. But what you want is somebody that's really studying the market to at least have those conversations with you to help guide you through that process.
Yeah, I think that's especially true as far as, being grounded in numbers, like when things happen now versus the last, 8 years, there wasn't a lot, you didn't have to be on point with your numbers because, as we talked about, rising market, right? Yeah. And so the margin for error was different there, whereas now there's more uncertainty. Your margin for error is going to shrink just naturally because of what's happened. And so being able to get really focused and know with confidence what you're doing is going to go a long way. About the data, that's MLS only specific data, right? So your best bet is going to be working with an agent, more than likely to get that data, right?
That's what we see, and the appraisers use the same MLS that we do. Mm-hmm. So that's part of getting an appraiser. The tricky part about appraisals is appraisals have a 12-month window. Mm-hmm. So depending on where you are and what the comps are, they are able to go out up to a year, sometimes even more. And given what we're experiencing in the environment, it's that can be your curse, because you're setting your price based off of historical numbers. And what we need to do is make an educated decision about where we're going. Mm-hmm. And the only way to do a trend line is to have other points behind today. Mm-hmm. It's just the reality of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, anything, as you guys, either of you want to chime in as far as looking forward, anything that adjustments that you're making with clients that you're working with, or expectations that you're trying to set?
From an expectation standpoint, I think the most valuable part of the conversation is that we need to be dynamic. Mm-hmm. Digging your heels in, basing your information off of past information is not going to help you move forward. I mentioned earlier the quantitative versus qualitative. Quantitative data is that, but it's also historical. Mm-hmm. So what we're looking for is, how do I create the perception, the intrinsic value with somebody, both the quantitative and qualitative standpoint, to allow them to choose your house over the competition. So be competitive. get them in your house. Your house might have better light. It might have better whatever, but you got to get them in at first. And we know that a key indicator in that is correct pricing. Now, what we don't want to do is undercut each other, because there's no need for that. We don't want to leave money on the table for our seller clients. However, that all starts with knowing the numbers and having an educated conversation about it.
Right. Zac, how about yourself? And you know, you're on here as the numbers guy.
All right. Well,
do you want to make any projections based on numbers looking forward, as far as what we might expect on, you know, when you run these numbers for April? And I know that's totally impossible, but
that's a great disclaimer. Totally impossible. However, I am a believer that, you know, actions speak louder than words. And I was a Marine, so I believe in leading from the front.
Yeah.
And I'm closing on a property right now. Right. And I have no interest in pulling out. I've had a great discussion with the sellers, just kind of informing them, like, you know, making sure we're starting that dialogue, like things are going to change, you know, but why you should be in Asheville, why this market is strong, why you should come here. All those things are still very, very strong. So I would say my prediction is that if you're a buyer, you might get a little bit more power. If you're a seller, you might get a little bit more humble. But other than that, I still think you keep moving forward, that nothing will change. Nothing will change in the fact that real estate is still a good idea. You need somewhere to live. It's an incredible way to invest. And, you know, it's a great place to do it.
Yeah. And Rodrigo, I just want to add to that.
Yeah.
This conversation is really interesting, because you've got two real estate agents on here. We're talking about the data. We're saying, oh, the market's fine. Blah. Like, it's what I want to really emphasize is we're in a really interesting and uncertain times, as I mentioned earlier. The number one priority is public safety, right? So we're in no way pushing, hey, you should get your house listed. And like, it's what we're saying is the market, the supply and demand parts of the market suggest that there are still great opportunities, both on the selling side and the buying side.
Right.
And I think we can navigate this as a community. And I think we're doing a great job with it. As a board of realtors here in the area, we've been drafting procedural documents to get everybody on the same page. So we're following best practices, recommendations from the CDC. And we're asking buyers and sellers to sign those, saying these are the way we're going to operate when we are in your house or showing you a house. So there's some confidence there. I just want to make it very clear that we also need to be aware and not have our head in the sand. Like, this is a big issue, but I believe market, this too shall pass. I mean, it's like, it's not, we're going to get through it.
No, I think it's one of those things, like, there is a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of newness, but we're also most well equipped to handle this than we've ever been before in the past. Like, can you imagine doing real estate videos and pictures, like when the MLS was still in like a paper, bound book or something? Like, that would be totally disruptive, where this isn't as disruptive. It's more of like, okay, what are the subtle shifts you have to make to still operate?
Here's the best part. So when Zac and I first started talking, Zac said the biggest challenge that he has when he goes to managers or CEOs, whatever, and he says, hey, he was a systems analyst, right? So he goes in, he looks at stuff, and he says, well, I think this could be more efficient this way. The number one thing you hear is what, Zac?
Resistance. It's the way we've always done it.
It's the way we've always done it.
Right.
What's really interesting is I don't know of any new technology we've adopted in the last month. I've had our office closed for a month. We're still doing business and closing transactions. We have not adopted a single piece of new technology. We have adopted technology at a higher level, and we've changed our processes. But to your point, all this stuff is here.
Right.
It's just a matter of leaning into it and creating those efficiencies, which I think will push through to the buyers and sellers.
No, absolutely. I think that's totally something that's important to recognize. So, well, guys, any final thoughts as we wrap up here? Any tidbits or insights on how quarantine life is going, or stay-at-home life is going? Anything to pass on to the to fellow viewers and listeners? I know for me, my story's been, I got a hair. My wife gave me a haircut because I was like, right as we went in, I needed to get my hair cut. I was like, okay, I probably should try not to wear a hat every day. I got my hair cut. I'm still wearing a hat every day, but it's not because my hair is long. It's just the haircut didn't go as smoothly as anticipated.
Right.
I think it's been challenging. Lean into your families, and I think that the most interesting thing is, as challenged as I am working from home, I've got 2 little boys, awesome wife, and the most challenging piece of that is that having them around, not being engaged, trying to work through the day, and then there's the balance between your spouse, your partner, or whatever your family. That's created a really interesting dynamic that is hard. So create a schedule with your environment, whatever that is, and try and maintain some normalcy, because it is the normalcy that'll give us the security to move forward on this. So just hold on to it and be willing to pivot. That's my word for this.
Yeah. Zac, how about yourself?
I think Jeff hit it great. But one question that Jeff poses all the time is, are you going to be an agent that's enabled by tech, or is it the tech that's going to be enabled by the agent? That same dynamic, And so I think this is a great time to be home if you're a buyer or a seller, or if you're an agent, to kind of use this information, start daydreaming, see what's going on, know the market, so you're not just walking in there empty. Just to keep it on topic for the real estate podcast here, inform yourself. You will have a link to the document here on your show notes, I believe.
Yeah, and we will. And it'll be on the website too, so it'll be there. So, well, thanks guys so much for taking the time, jumping on here, working through our Zoom difficulties and everything. But yeah, appreciate you guys jumping on here and sharing some insight.
Awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely. Have a good one, y'all. Take care.